right, today we are going to go on a tour of Angela Johnson's studio inside here.
Hey, hi, Seth.
Hey,
Hey, it's good to see you.
good
Come
to
in.
see you too. What a pleasant
Welcome
surprise.
to my studio.
Wow. Incredible.
So you can just take it in for a minute.
I see you finished the
Yes.
more or less, right?
Yes. That was our live stream last time.
How long did it take you to do this
It's
one?
been quite diligent effort. So I've been working on it, a week and a half, since 2 weeks maybe since you've been here.
Wow. All right, well, if you want, just give us a tour of your studio.
Yeah, well, welcome to my studio, everyone that's watching. And when you first look at this Vision of the Tree of Life exhibit, one thing that you'll notice right away is that there are a lot of statues here. A lot of statues of people and the glorious tree of life there at the very apex of the exhibit with Jesus Christ standing next to it. And in this artistic presentation, we're going to take a closer look at the energies of light and darkness. And there are many stories of different people and different situations that I've sculpted into this exhibit to help us connect with the fact that we are part of this journey. And so I would like to draw attention to the fact that right here, if you come up closer, on this what I call multitude ridge, there are 3 different ethnic groups. And if you can zoom in and get the expression on their faces, each one of us is so unique and have different perspectives, emotions, feelings, and that's what I'm trying to capture with the detail in the faces of all of these statues, so that we can feel part of this journey and the story that's being told here. So we're going to move around the different zones of the exhibit of the Tree of Life. So hopefully one of these statues, or more than one, will speak to you, and you will feel like maybe that's a family member, or that's a friend, or maybe it's even a portrait of you. But the saga, the human saga that we are living right now, even though this represents different cultures, different time periods, what we experience as the family of God is really quite similar. So let's go over here and look at the heart of the exhibit. And that is the statue that we just saw of the Savior on the cross. All the statues that you're going to see will be increased to this larger than life scale. And this zone right over here has 9 different depictions from the life of Jesus Christ. So this, of course, is the Holy Family, Mary, Jesus, and Joseph. And the expression here is their devotion and complete commitment to the will of God in raising and protecting the Son of God. And there's so much love here. And as you look at these different statues, one of my goals, and something very close to my heart, is portraying what it could have felt like to walk with Jesus when he was on earth. This is him at the age of 12 teaching in the temple to the doctors and lawyers. And if you look closely at the eyes and the expressions on their faces, there is that story, that backstory of them expressing their individuality, which I think is very pleasing to God. The diversity and the uniqueness of each one of us, I think, is very important. And hopefully when you see these statues, what you also see is a mirror of the love that I feel for the Word of God in the Holy Bible, and also in the Book of Mormon. And this is a depiction of the baptism of Christ. So that's John the Baptist, the Savior, God the Father, and then the symbol of the Holy Ghost in the dove. this is Jesus teaching Nicodemus and each one of us the truths about what it means to be spiritually reborn. And that's a concept that I am so fascinated with that I love to contemplate it and see how it's being made manifest in my life every day, many times a day. And so if you could hear the sounds of the streets of Jerusalem, if you could smell the aroma of that important part of earth, and this is the publican and the Pharisee, and to remind us in this parable that Jesus taught that we must follow Christ without hypocrisy and without deception.
And what do those gestures symbolize?
Yeah, well, for example, look at this one. And if you look at the little tiny finger, if you were going to preach to someone or pontificate, you would go like that. Watch my little finger. See that?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about the power of a little finger, but when you sometimes it's customary when you're sipping tea also. But then if you look at this Pharisee, he is actually pushing back the prayer shawl. And in essence saying, no, God, you step behind me. I am the most important. I am the most powerful. And it's a very dismissive, condescending, patronizing gesture. And so as you can see, he looks very puffed up, very full of himself and his eyes, but yet are watching.
You're talking about him. He's pushing
him.
the prayer shawl behind him.
He's pushing the prayer shawl behind him, but his eyes are trying to make sure that he is noticing his importance.
Wow. Okay.
And you should be able to, when someone comes up, that my desire is that when I sculpt this, that those feelings will connect with us without too much of an explanation. And when we stop and we think about it, it gives us almost a moment to pause and say, okay, so when do I reflect that feeling of self-importance? This is a miracle where Christ raised the son of the widow of Nain. And I loved what I heard a presenter recently say when he said, sometimes people become confused with the spectacular nature of miracles. But what he said that I loved so much was, but when you look at what a miracle it is to be born, raising someone from the dead should not be that spectacular, because it's such a miracle that we even exist at all. And I really agree with that. So having seen the larger than life one, this is how they start, in the small maquette size.
And how tall is that?
Oh, that's probably about 30 inches high.
30 inches high versus how tall?
That's almost 13 feet.
13 feet.
Yeah.
And just a reminder for those who don't know, what Angela does is she creates this design first, and then it's digitally scanned.
Right.
And then they create a foam cutout that you
cover with clay.
Cover with clay and add additional details to.
Yes. And so here is a 4-scene progression of the prodigal son. This is another parable that Christ taught, where the son demanded of the father his inheritance. And typically, according to the custom, a child did not receive their inheritance until the father had passed away. So in essence, he was saying, I wish you were dead. It was a very cruel thing that he did.
So if the prodigal is asking for his inheritance, he's saying,
in essence, he is saying, I have no love, no respect for you, and I'm going to completely negate you out of my life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
and squander the inheritance.
Yeah. Well, he had he thought his inheritance was so much that it would last forever. But in this scene, he found out it didn't last forever, and he spent all of his inheritance. But the thing is that when we are in a state of collapse and sin and transgression, we rarely only just hurt ourselves. So he's impacted this young woman's life. And if you can come in here and zoom on his face, once again, it's the emotion where and you can see him thinking, what do I do now? I thought I was really something, and now I have nothing. So I wanted to take apart this parable, at least with these 4 different scenes, to help us really contemplate. And if you come up here, this is really the whole transition, not only of him, but of his heart. And that emotional expression in his face has so many different emotions interwoven and mingled in that countenance.
Well, that is the moment where he came to himself, right?
Yes, that's correct. This is where he came to himself. And yet you look at this Barbarossa swine, and Christ said it's very important to not cast our pearls before swine. But if you show his foot right down here, that he starts out with very fine clothing and fine shoes, and yet he comes with rags and no shoes, and he is stepping in the same muck and mire that the swine are standing in.
And again, this is the prodigal son.
Yeah, this is the prodigal son. And I think what how each one of us comes to ourselves is oftentimes through struggle and through hardship, where it really brings about a moment of crisis where we're looking at something completely different than we did before we entered into the period of hard times. So with art and sculpture, I think it's phenomenal what can be what messages can be presented.
And then what is this final one in the background?
Yeah, this final one is when I also made a connection with the prodigal son of the parable of 2 fathers. And this is God the Father. And in this ultimate ascent, we each spiritually and developmentally are prodigal children to God. We may make demands of God and say, I deserve this. And God, if you love me, you will give me what I ask for. But then here, through his experiences, and he's turning his face away as though he can't even bear to look up to God because he's ashamed of himself. And he has so much, there's no way he can explain everything to God. And this pose of God is he doesn't ask for an explanation. He just wants us to come because God understands. And as we begin to become strong enough so that we can turn around and look at motivation and in hindsight see, but it's his sustaining love, it's the power of God moving into our lives to lift us up that was the all important objective with this piece. And even though it's very hard, the look of love on the face, it's hard to see it, the look of love on God the Father's face as I was sculpting it was very spiritually moving and impactful for me. So when you see the shadow of the cross on the wall, you look at that. You look at Christ and the cross, the shadow of the cross on the wall, and the prodigal. He is in between these members of a divine Godhead, where it is God sent his son so that his sacrifice for the law of justice would make it possible for us to repent, possible for us, for him to bury our sorrows and our griefs, and to be able to return back to God. So that is the worth of each individual soul, is that deity is striving to reach down and lift us up. And we got to participate with them in doing that instead of fighting it. So as we go and look at the other statues, this story comes with that because they're prophets. Lehi and Nephi saw Christ in vision 600 years before Jesus was born. And that was taught, and then when you turn, and you see a whole different view here. You see an iron rod where people are striving to make this very difficult ascent up to a higher reality. And this higher reality is going towards the direction of the tree of life. And when we are asked to get to shed ourselves of selfishness and self-centeredness, it's hard. And even self-pity, where we really feel sorry for ourselves and feel like everything is just falling apart, to be able to let go and to embrace the higher truth of God, that can be really hard, because we're trying to survive and we're trying to protect ourselves. And sometimes in doing that, we're suffocating ourselves at the very same time. So lots of stories going here, but this individual with the title of Liberty from the Book of Mormon is Captain Moroni. This is a defender of the faith, Ammon. That is King Benjamin, holding the historical records of his people. And then that husband and wife right there in the center of the presentation is Lehi, Sariah, and then Nephi is right below them, the voice of the Book of Mormon, and his wife and baby. And you step down, and that's his older brother, Sam. And as we walk over there, we'll see his older brothers that were really drawn by a very dark energy away from their family, which later led to great contention between those members of the family. And these are the Native Americans. So that's the beauty of our individuality throughout the history of time and their unique culture. And it was so wonderful that a man and his family came in and he said, "Oh, that squash blossom hairstyle that you see on those Native Americans right down there,
It's down there.
that's the Hopi tribe." And he said, those are my people. I am from the Hopi tribe. And he was sharing that with his two little girls, which just made me so happy that it was really relevant to him. And he said, you don't see that very often.
And how many statues are there currently?
There are currently around 200.
200 statues, just here.
Mm-hmm. Right, on the Tree of Life exhibit. And then in bringing the timeline forward, this woman right here is holding two little children. And her name is Aurelia Spencer Rogers. Her history is that her and her siblings were orphaned when she was 14 and her older sister was 15. And they had the strength and the courage and the faith to take their siblings across the plains with the pioneers that moved to Salt Lake City. But she was also the founder of the primary. And through the primary, people who would not understand their true identity have been able to really internalize their identity as children of God through the music that is taught to children. For example, that I am a child of God. And that kind of devotion to helping others is one of the main messages of this exhibit, which is a reflection of the truths and the personality that radiate from Christ. Because as we've seen with Christ on the cross, that's most definitely what he did for us. And then this is the close-up of Laman. This is Nephi's older brother. And as complicated as our individual justification for why we feel the way that we do, this had severe consequences for his posterity for hundreds of years.
Phil,
this is his brother Lemuel right here.
Sorry to get a.
Yeah.
Feel free to ask Angela any questions. She'll answer them. He's happy to do so. This is a live recording.
That second couple on the iron rod, I went to India in 2007 and was so inspired by the beauty of the people. And so I wanted to include them. And here again, their desire for happiness, for light, for strong families is, is something that I was able to observe. So as we enter into this dark space, this is once again an opportunity to focus on not just this darkness, but the darkness that is in our society, in our culture. It's a hard thing to talk about, but what's even harder is to not talk about it because we're impacted by it. And as we go around and look at the statues inside the great and spacious building, it gives us the opportunity to pause and reflect on how destructive it is. And as it isn't something that's a relative issue, or that it is what is dark and evil to one person is not to another. This is the evil that is common to all of the family of God. And the responsibility is with each one of us to make the decision on what our behavior will be. Because we can't really, maybe that we can influence others, but that's an individual choice on what the decisions will be. So, in the vision of the tree of life, these diametrically opposed energies were represented, and you could start to see by the internal space a lot of different messages. But what you don't see is you don't see families, you don't see relationships here. You see people in states of aggrandizing themselves, of posturing, of, for example, this man right here is Herod the Great, and he earned the blood on his throne and on his arms because he was the one that ordered his soldiers to take the lives of the little babies of Bethlehem in the attempt to eliminate any competition to his power. And behind him is an interpretation of the devil, of Satan, who is really a predator. And in the act of the spears, of taking the life of a victim, he's not even concerned about that individual as he is searching for his next victim.
And then all these chains.
Yeah, and the chains are a timeless representation of bondage. Because you can try, but you can't break them. Except for Jesus Christ can. And through him, we really can have deliverance from this space. And one time when I was giving a tour to people, there was a little 8-year-old boy here. But one of the very first things that he noticed after looking at this is that his eyes focused on that woman right there. And he said, "But she's leaving." And I thought that was so precious because no one here is leaving except her. And the story of Adar is that she begins, Seth, if you can capture this right here, she's the central figure right there in the position and attitude of mocking. And she has a very hard look on her face. And so she is mocking the people who are walking on the path of faith with a desire to follow the example of Christ.
And what you wanted to do with her is illustrate a story or a journey of repentance, right?
Yeah, of an awakening. Yeah, because here, and when we mock other people, we can feel strong, because when we tear, it's an odd mutation, I think, of human nature, that when you're tearing someone else down, you can temporarily have this momentary feeling of you're more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Adar is doing right there. But when we go walk inside, I have sculpted 6 statues that tell this journey of this transition in her heart, similar to the one of the prodigal son. For when we move down here, and then if you can get a close up on her eyes.
This is her as well.
This is her as well. And
Number-
she doesn't look so confident now anymore. But the thing that she is she's exhausted. She's absolutely bone weary. She's played all the games. She has all of the external signs of success, but internally she is haunted by no true identity or purpose, and that everything that she felt that she was striving to obtain, she has those things in her life, but she is truly miserable. And in that misery, if you can show that's Adar right there.
It's number 3.
Mm-hmm. Yep, in a very state of isolation where she's completely closed off from anyone. And the thing is that isolation does not solve anything. It actually increases the pain. So she's confused because she has tried the self-medication and it isn't addressing the pain. So right here, and this is Adar number 4, it just erupts, and it's the pain, the depression, the despair is so far beyond what she can manage. And the thing that she reflects with any residual light in her mind is that she remembers the efforts and the love and the society and the compassion of those that were holding fast to that iron rod.
Inside the window.
Yeah. And they give her the strength to leave. And then we saw that statue, but then if you can get this one right over there where she's on the iron rod, that is her. That is her right over there. And she's holding fast to the iron rod.
Right there on the edge there.
Right on the edge there. And she's taking big strides because for the first time in her adult life, she feels alive. And she feels like she has a purpose because she understands her worth. She begins to have true worth, not just on the external things, but on who she is internally. And that woman in despair right up there who has her face in her hands.
Mm-hmm.
Adar is reaching, Adar is reaching out to her. And this is one of the true manifestations of light and faith is when we have compassion. And not only but it's an active compassion where we strive to reach out to other people and to actually help them. And most definitely not judge them, but to listen to them and find out what we can do to help them.
We had a comment from Asua Fredrickson. Said, thanks for sharing your talent and knowledge of the Almighty God, his Son, and all of the ministries he taught, including some great parables.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That means a lot to me. I appreciate that.
And so some of these figures I've noticed they have dark robes on them. Well, what's that mean?
It's very symbolic because this individual, yes, in art is covered with this dark, actual cankered, festering robe that when it becomes bronze and in the larger than life scale will be dark as well. But it references what is in his heart and what is in his mind. Because we can't always see on the outside what someone is inside. But this is what that reflects. And then that darkness is one of not honoring or respecting life or other people. So it really is a corrosive, decaying, that the nature of seeking that darkness, it brings people down rather than lifts them up. And we use down and up as a metaphor of collapse or ascent. And when we ascend, we have a sense of peace where we don't have to prove ourselves. Or we don't have to posture and push others down. in order to lift ourselves up. That's a phenomenal, beautiful thing, because the culture that exists in the world is many times exactly the opposite. And that when you own more things, you're more important than someone else. And that could not be further from the truth.
Very materialistic.
Mm-hmm. And I loved what someone told me about their interpretation of the light color of these pillars. And this was something that this person taught me that I had never thought of before. And with the state of Adar being able to leave this, actually have a rebirth and completely change her life, he said, are these pillars light because they represent the power of Christ that is holding this space up, allowing these people the space to change.
Like time of probation.
Yeah.
To repent and change.
Yeah.
Move forward.
And that when if Christ were to remove his power, what would happen to this building if the pillars went away?
It would collapse.
It would collapse.
Now, I remember at a certain point you were talking about how this building was going to be held up.
Yeah.
That's sort of a behind. I don't know if that's possible anymore, but the initial concept you had for
was that the people's arms would be underneath and the people's arms would be holding up the building.
The building that they wanted to get into, but the building was crushing them.
Yes.
Yeah. It was really apt for the great and spacious building.
Yeah. So just a few more people here, and then I want to address this woman, the showgirl, the woman in the beautiful red dress, and her name is Bait. And what's so fun about art is in the poetic communication of the energy of the piece comes a name, and that's her name. It's Bait. And the lingo that I created to go with her is watch your eyes, how long they stare. It's bait. That's meant to take you there. And when you look at the sophistication and alluring nature of how people can be presented, and the sparkle and the flash of it, it doesn't tell the whole story. It is only one tiny agenda that someone wants to portray, that her beauty is because of the clothes that she's wearing. And if we come up here, before we go up there, that's gone, but I want to go up there so they can see her better. But you can focus on this one right here, Seth. This man looking in the mirror of truth. So he is completely bound with chains. And if this person took advantage his whole entire life of other people and used them and stole from them and deceived them, what he has done to himself, no one else did this to him, but he did it to himself. And he is literally weighed down with all these chains. And that in eternity, the time comes when we can't hide it anymore. We can't pretend to be something other than we are. We have to look in this mirror of truth, and ourselves and our thoughts are immediately revealed. We can't dodge, we can't pretend, and the externals mean nothing. And that it's manifest that there's no space, no room for deception. That's the symbolism of that.
And the head upstairs?
Yeah. So a couple more figures. This older woman right here in the beautiful maroon dress, her name is Gone. And when she was younger, she was Bait. But then the remembrance is that time passes and none of us is going to stay young forever. So in her later years, her youth is gone, her beauty is gone, her fame is gone, and she has nothing but a few relics of the past. No one cares about her. She is all alone. She made the decision to never have a family, to never marry, and that her entire life was going to be focused by complete self-absorption. And at the end of her life, she has nothing. This man who is sitting here in the middle, his name is Gluttony. And his disgruntled expression is that he cannot figure out why he is so miserable because his whole life was devoted to taking absolutely anything and everything that he wanted. And he did not respect that restraint gives a greater uh, amount of freedom than continually taking. It's being able to have those desires and appetites and passions of the body, be submissive to the will of the spirit, and that is it. That type of ability to become the master of our desires, which is where we can actually experience joy. And there's an individual right down there sitting in the windowsill behind the devil, and that's a person who's called Alma. And in his life's history, that angel right there appeared to him from the presence of God and commanded him to stop destroying other people. And because we have the history of his life, he definitely went through great pain as he reflected on how he had actually hurt many people. But he turned his life over to God. And once again, in this great and spacious building, representation is also the reality that God gives us that chance to make different choices, but we must embrace them. And just before we leave this space, if we could focus a minute on the scene of human trafficking. There are two little children right there with an angel of white and a man who is counting the money in a very similar way that Judas sold Christ, who was perfectly innocent, just like those little children. And that he is selling those souls for money, which are nothing but metal chips in his hand. So this is what I said when we started to enter in here. It isn't hard. It is an instant understanding that that is wrong. That is evil. It's easier to have the blurred line on other things, but not there. And yet millions of people suffer because of the actions of individuals who have committed themselves to the dark side. And that angel represents that God knows where each and every one of his children is. He knows what they have to endure. And many times angels are sent to strengthen them and possibly deliver them.
And so there's the person who's um, the sculpture that is very dark, and then there's this sculpture that is very light.
Right? Yeah, and we're the ones that choose. It really doesn't work very much to say, well, I'll have a bit of both. I'll go to the smorgasbord of life and I'll have a little bit of darkness because it's kind of exciting and fun, but then I'll pick and choose from the elements of light. What that tends to do is negate out the whole experience and pull you down. I love it when I heard that said that if our hearts are not set upon Christ, then the things of the world will eventually draw us to them. So that magnetic pull is a reality. And if we make no decision, then we've already made a decision because that's a lethargic state of existence where nothing is happening, which is definitely a pull over to the dark side. And as we move around, the thing I love to point out why I love sculpture, sorry, is all the different perspectives and all the different viewpoints that we can have. Now, from this point, you can actually see more of the people on the iron rod as well as the people who are on the balconies of the great and spacious, mocking and calling and exuding an energy of euphoria.
We have a comment from Castle Duke. Beautifully testified, and thank you for sharing your testimony of Jesus Christ to all of us. I love you, friend.
Well, thank you, Castle. I love you. Thank you. So you can see Adar from this point of view right here.
She's holding her hand out right there.
Yeah, and the look on her face is so different from the one where she's sitting and mocking and pointing. But that range exists in each one of us. And and then there's this one, Seth, you can focus on the young man that's falling down the cliff. And what's so interesting is I try to point out that our internal reality can be one thing that is completely different than what other people see. And that this man had been standing by that iron rod, hoping that he could please his family by just going through the motions of being a religious person. But in his heart, every chance he would get, he would lust after the dark things like pornography and those very base desires, because he felt he could have it both ways. And the truth is, you can't have it both ways. They demand loyalty. And this path of the iron rod does not demand perfection. It asks for us to give ourselves over to Christ. It helps us find out our true identity, as the energy of the great and spacious building brings us down into a very state of despicable existence.
We have another comment from Grandma Gay, and she says, "Thank you. Hugs and love."
Oh, thank you, Gay. I love that. This angel right here, this woman is an angel of light. And those voices in that one balcony right there said, their criticism of her is that as a wife and a mother, that she's living beneath her potential, and that she should go out into the world and accomplish greater things than waste her time in being a wife and mother. But here in the body language of this woman, even though you can't really see her from this angle, but she's content and she's intelligent, modest, beautiful, powerful, and is not intimidated by voices of or criticism or mocking from other people.
No, what's interesting is the dichotomy, right? The building would suggest ease, comfort, shelter,
wealth.
Wealth, and a place to relax, right? And the iron rod would suggest the opposite. This is uncomfortable. This is difficult. This is arduous. This is it'll put a strain on you, right? But the irony is that it's the reverse. All of the people in the building who chose the comfort and the wealth and the promises of the world are miserable, while the people who are choosing to go uphill and sacrifice and do the work that is required to be obedient, they are the ones that are powerful, that are peaceful.
I love the way you express that. I completely agree. So in this area here, up by the tree of life and up by Christ, when you look at their faces, I mean, there's community here. There isn't competition. There isn't contention of who's more important to God. It is that we are all of great worth. And the different ethnic groups also expresses that this is a message from God for all of his children. And I really love the expressions on the body language of the little children, which is just innocent outpouring from their little souls, which has It's void of the complications that we have as adults. It's pure. And I think that is why Jesus said, "Let the little children come unto me," is because they are pure as Christ is. But these are the ones that were not threatened by acknowledging that all of God's children have worth. They didn't have to tear down other people or criticize them or mock them. And at the same time, they have embraced their own worth, which brings out a very powerful dynamic equality. These two little children, these twins right here, that is a commission of a little boy named Milo and a little girl named Nora.
Sitting on the bench.
Mm-hmm. And that story right there is a real life story about a family that live in the Salt Lake Valley, and of how they were expecting twins. And when the twins were born prematurely, Milo lived and Nora only lived 15 hours. And then she passed away. But what they wanted was they wanted a depiction of Nora to constantly be part of their family so she would not fade in their laughter, in their embraces, in their family events over time. And they have felt her spirit from heaven close to them, giving them peace and love and comfort. So this is the reminder. And when they become bronzed, Milo will be in a light patina, and Nora will be in the lighter patina, and Milo will be in just a beautiful soft golden brown coloration. And so she has her arm around him and strengthening her brother. I don't think there can really be much of a closer association than um, conception in the womb together. So that was a very special thing for me to be able to sculpt for that family.
It's interesting. Do you remember when you gave me the keys to the studio to come in and film at night?
Yeah.
So I came up here. This was almost a year ago. I was up here. Yeah, 6 months ago, 8 months ago. I came up here, this very spot, and I was listening to a show I like to listen to. It's kind of a religious one, and a caller had called in about the death of his son.
Okay.
His son was a toddler, and he was saying how hard it was for him to reconcile that with God. And the man who was speaking to him started testifying about God. They weren't LDS; they're Christian. They're just talking to each other,
Right.
And it was really potent because I was standing here, looking out at these children next to Christ while they were saying that. So I took a video of it and I talked to the dad who had lost his son. I told him I was listening to the show while you were sharing the story about your son who had passed away, and I was filming this. And I sent the video to him, and he got it.
That's so
He said,
wonderful.
"Thank you."
But you see the majesty of God, that He could touch your heart and my heart and His heart all at the same time in a desire to comfort and teach us.
Yeah.
That is so
And it
beautiful.
was the same. We're talking about
Yeah.
God comforting those who have lost loved ones, and
Mm-hmm.
remarkable. And it's right here when you stand here next to a representation of the tree of life.
Yeah. And can you see that little baby inside the shawl of the mother? Come right in here and tuck that
Oh wow,
the
yes.
camera there. Yeah. And so she's from a tribe in Africa that wears the beautiful beaded collars. And I just loved this photo of her and the little boy. So it's the understanding of really the awe, AWE, that we can feel that amidst our all the rubble that falls on top of us of our insignificance, and we can just let God push that aside and say, "Oh no, we are His children, each and every one of us," and that's the message of the overarching desire and objective of creating this vision of the tree of life. And as you can zoom in on Christ on the cross over there, look at that. Isn't that so beautiful? And he died for each and every one of us so that his humiliation on the cross, his suffering, his torment, even as the great creator of earth. And this makes me so emotional, is I love what he said in the New Testament where he says, "In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you, so that where I am, ye may be also." And that's the true spirit of Christ, one of embrace and light and love. And that's what I tried to portray in the faces of these people who are up here around the tree of life.
One of the most amazing things to me about this studio, it's a studio of faith, is that while the world outside seems to be tearing itself apart with confusion or secularism or contention and anger and a very, very dominant spirit of materialism, hatred, division, there's this studio where Angela was quietly sculpting all of these people, all of these different people from all walks of life, all of them children of God, all of them finding their way back to the tree of life, back to Christ.
Yeah, and it's back to that light that really can exist right in the very core of our own souls. And we don't have to succumb to those uh, energies in the world that strive to pull us down. We can find our way to shine and give light. And I heard the story about an elderly woman that would wave to children as they would walk by her window on the way to school. And children grew up year after year to seeing her wave. It didn't cost her anything. She was expressing the most simple social sign of love in waving to the children. And many of the children, not all, but would start to very gently wave back to her. And when we, just like your wonderful sharing that this is really what I've been doing through, 2020 and 2021 was creating these statues. We can choose to look around and build people up and have that own radiance of life inside and build ourselves up at the same time. And I just love it because Seth, you're a very good example of that to me.
Thank you. And thank you, Angela, for giving us this tour of the studio. If people want to learn more about you and the work you're doing, where would you encourage them to go?
I would encourage them and invite them to go to the treeoflifevision.org website.
Learn more about it there.
Yeah.
Angela, thank you so much for letting us come
and
here.
Thank you for all of you that commented during our broadcast.